Okay. Great. Welcome to Senate Education this Wednesday, February 21st, 2024. Ms. St. James, in our folders, we have an updated CTE bill, I believe.
Not updated.
Not updated, sorry. Some policy decisions. So it's as introduced.
Yes.
Okay, it is as introduced. So it's in our, as I said to Ms. St. James, my life dreams would include moving CTE, literacy, libraries, Senator Hashim's bill on refugees, something to do with electronic devices, all by a week from Friday, and that leaves us miscellaneous ed, some things having to do with boards and commissions, and maybe a couple other little things to do when we get back. That's, but make it more dense. So, Ms. St. James, if you want to just take us through before we hear from Mr. Smith, CTE, where we're at, some of the decision points, things of that nature would be great.
Sure. Beth St. James, Office of Legislative Counsel. What we're working with today is as 304 as introduced, which is a committee bill. And we did a very high level. I don't think it even took 2 minutes to walk through it. So I thought maybe we could do a little bit of a deeper look at it, and I could, answer any questions, or we could, if we're going to work on any sections. Do you want to talk about? Yes.
Yeah. So the finance, we are still, I think, trying to figure some of the finance stuff out. I'm looking at my Agency of Education point person. Still quite a bit that we need from all of you on the finance section. I'll leave it there. I know the secretary is coming in tomorrow. And so if she and others could really come in with some financing components to this bill, that would be very helpful.
For the record, Ted Fisher from my Agency of Education. I'm the agency's Director of Communications and Legislative Affairs. Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have had some conversations with Beth, and she's given us some questions, and we're answering those. And I think there's still some more drafting work to do between the agency and Beth, but my hope is that we'll have something ready by Friday.
I'll be ready tomorrow, actually.
Secretary Boucher is actually on the calendar for Friday.
Oh, is she Friday? My apologies then. Friday. But I would encourage you to be ready a day early. Here's the thing. I've seen some of those edits. I think you guys should really have to have some serious conversations before you bring that work forward. I'll be frank. I think the agency really needs to dig in and bring a solid product to the committee when the agency comes in on Friday.
Right. I appreciate
for now. Ms. St. James, if you would take us through the sections that are not related to finance, that would be helpful.
Sure. Section 1. So we're going to work. The bill is introduced, and we're going to jump right to page 2. We're going to skip over the statement of purpose. Section 1 is, and you'll see there's reader assistance headings. That's what we call the language in between the asterisks. So there might be several sections kind of grouped together. So I think it might be easiest to look at each topic. So we'll start with CTE tuition.
And if anybody has any concerns at any point, things you like or don't like, let's jump in and
have my colored pen ready.
Great.
So the first section 1 under the CTE tuition readers heading would be an amendment, and we're primarily working in chapter 37, which is the CTE chapter here. So secondary student tuition is the statute, section 1552 is the statute that talks about high school secondary student tuition. So there's adult CTE and then there's secondary CTE. So we're talking about high school here. How the money's flowing and how tuition is charged to a school district, which is the model right now. So this bill is proposing right now tuition is charged to a school district on the average of the district's 3 prior years full-time equivalent student enrollment in the CTE. And the bill proposes to just base the tuition on the district's prior year full-time enrollment. So going from an average of 3 years prior, I think you hear it referred to as the 6 semester average, going down to just 1 year. And there's a
Yes, please. Is there anybody that can speak to the logic of the change? I mean, idea must have come from somewhere.
Why we're dropping it down.
Yeah, I mean, it seems logical to take a more
Yeah,
longer range view than a shorter range.
so we have a CTE report that we did high level overview of last week. It comes from that. We'll also hear from Mr. Smith, who represents the CTEs. He'll talk a little bit about the logic behind it. Please.
Point of clarity, Vermont Retail Lumber Dealers Association.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes,
But is interested in this topic.
yes, sir.
And then we had some testimony last year about getting kids in early, sooner the better.
Right.
And that's sort of the logic behind it.
Is that because the program as it exists now doesn't include them? And if it was 3 years prior, it always seemed like that even if it was 3 years or 1 year, there always become a dampening effect.
So as I recall, and we'll have Jody Emerson in to talk to us a little bit more about this, but last year, one of the things we talked about was how, when you get there really late in your educational career, it's number one, not a lot of students can take part in it. We know that we have a lot of kids that are leaving school, dropping out of school, that kind of thing. And I think that's one of the
I
reasons
get
we
all
want to
that.
get more.
Those
Yeah.
are great reasons, and I support that 100%.
Beautiful.
Okay, no worries.
Okay.
No, it's about figuring out what the tuition cost is.
Oh, the tuition cost itself, Mr. Fisher.
For the record, Ted Fisher again. So the 6 semester average that is in the bill currently, and we're actually asking to be struck effective this coming fiscal year. What the effect has been in recent years has been that it is depressed the amount of funding they receive based on the tuition, and that's partly a COVID effect. We have lower participation rates in the couple of years back. So CTE centers have more students this year, but the amount of tuition that they're getting is based on that 6 semester average or that 3 years of program data. And so this was one of the recommendations of the APA report that I referenced last week. It's a recommendation that we would like to do immediately because we think it will help. And in the out years, I think you're going to want to hear more from us next year about if we move on in terms of CTE finance as part of implementation. It may be that several years of data becomes a useful thing again, but that's a we don't know yet kind of question. For right now, we have an immediate problem with this.
Okay, thanks.
Senator Gillett, sure.
No, I was still gonna respond to Senator Weeks's question, but Mr. Fisher did.
CTEs.
So section 2, the conforming change along the same lines. So this is making a conforming change when we're looking at tuition charged. You look on page 3. And instead of looking at that 6 semester average or 3 year prior average, we're looking at the 1 year full-time equivalent enrollment. And then we're going to go to section 3 on page 3, line 5, CTE opportunity for grades 6 through 10. So section 1554, section 1551A, the responsibility of local boards and sending districts. We looked at this language a little bit last year when we were looking at lines 9
Just
to
tell
10.
me where you are.
Page 3.
Yeah.
Section 3.
Section. Thank you.
Yep, if you look at lines 9 and 10, we talked about, 9 through 12, really. We looked at this language a little bit last year, and these are the grades right now that state law requires CTE to be offered for, right? 11 and 12. So if you go to page 4, this section proposes to add some requirements to the statute. So for grades 6 through 8, the bill proposes to require school districts to provide those grades with career enrichment and exposure, including at least 1 annual visit to the school district's regional career and tech ed center. And then for grades 9 through 10, the bill proposes to require school districts to provide a genuine opportunity to participate fully in pre-tech and exploratory career and technical courses. Any questions before we move on? Seeing none. Okay. Section 4 of the bill, so on page 4, line 8. Proposing to, and I think we're gonna be the same version here, it just made me nervous when you all changed pages there. Section 4 is proposing to add a new statute to Title 16 in Chapter 37, Comprehensive Career Development Policy, which would require the Secretary of Education, in consultation with the Commissioner of Labor, to develop a model comprehensive career development policy and implementation plan for all high school students. The secretary would be required to review the model policy not less than every 5 years and make a determination as to whether it needs to be updated. And the policy has to address the following items: the role of CTE centers in providing career-focused education, how each supervisory union's career education and counseling policy practices align with the CTE programs of study, how supervisory unions will work with CTE centers and other supervisory unions in the region to develop common and joint courses and approaches to CTE, career exploration, and CTE exposure. On page 5 now. The model policy has to have a plan for meeting the pre-tech and exploratory CTE requirements that we just walked through. Those were the new additions for grades 9 and 10 and 6 through 8. And then the model policy also has to provide a plan for meeting the career enrichment and exposure requirements. So that's grades 6 through 8, and then subdivision 4 is grades 9 through 10. And then each SU is required to adopt a policy on this topic that is at least as comprehensive as the model policy adopted by the secretary. And if they don't, they fail to adopt a policy or procedures, they will be presumed to have adopted the most current model policy and procedures published by the secretary. And that's similar to what you see for the school branding model policy requirement and paving craft eventually model policy.
Thank you. Senator Rushing.
When, I was looking at the effective date and it's July 1st, 2024, it's all of this. When will this particular section be required to be completed, because we still don't have a secretary?
Yep, so if you look at section 5, this is the transition or the development for section 4.
Got it. Thank you.
Yep, so let's just walk through that.
Oh.
So
Senator Hewitt.
I want to answer this.
She just did.
Okay. Each supervisory union of speed on page
Mhm.
5. Is that, so these are schools that don't necessarily have a career and technical center.
no, this is each SU is required to adopt a comprehensive career development policy.
So that seems to me separate from CTE. I mean, a career development policy could be anything.
And what this language, so you can make this whatever you want, right? It's titled Career Development Policy, and then the model policy has to include several items, and it's all centered around CTE, career and technical education. It's all centered around career and technical education. So career development. I see what you're saying, right? There's no guidance counselor referenced here, right? Like,
Yeah.
there could be other things that go into career development. So you could certainly change the name of it or add items to the model policy.
Okay, I'm just,
You just don't, correct me if I'm, so you're concerned, like, it's so broad. You could come out with comprehensive career development plans that have nothing to do with CTEs in a way, or,
yeah,
I mean,
it's odd. It starts getting into the question of like, what is education? It's kind of, I don't know, it seems strange to me.
Reshape it to CTE specific.
That's a whole other conversation. Do we really want to go down that road? I don't know. Maybe.
this is interesting. Tell us again, so tell us what exactly every SU would be doing here.
So the first thing, so SU could be adopting a policy
Yeah.
based on a model policy that AOE has to develop.
Right, and that model policy is the one that we just went through that talks about CTEs.
Correct.
Yeah,
So that's it.
that's it.
So they would be, so SUs are required to adopt a policy,
Yeah,
at least as comprehensive
as the one that we see on page 4,
as the
section
A,
4.
well, so this is, yes, so section 4, lines 16 through 4 on the next page, line 5, or page 5. So subdivisions 1 through 5 are putting into law what the model policy has to address.
So on page 5, line 11, between the words comprehensive and career, why don't we just drop in CTE? Keep it focused.
But Senator Gulick's concern, correct me if I'm wrong, Senator Gulick, is page 5, line 6, comprehensive career development.
Drop it in there too. We just shift this.
So, no, so what we're trying to do is and I want to give credit where credit's due, this is Senator Clarkson's good work, something she's been involved in. She drafted the bill. Was kind enough just to add my name, and now it's committee bill. How do we improve career technical education in the state? How do we get more kids involved? All that kind of thing. So I think maybe for now, we do just drop in, make it career technical education consistently throughout, so that the studies and everything reflect that work. So would that make you feel?
It's still really, I don't know, I have to sit with this a little while, it just seems odd, and I guess I would like to hear from people in the field.
Yeah.
Because I have mixed feelings, I think career education is super important and we should be encouraging kids to think about their careers, but there's also learning for learning's sake and the joy of learning and just, I don't know,
And not having it like
so
career.
so prescribed and so.
Mhm.
So that's all, that's what, and that's what, and this doesn't seem necessarily connected to a CTE program, it seems kind of like,
dropped in.
yeah.
Yeah, please.
Well, my understanding of the bill is we're not trying to solve all of the career development problems in our high schools or middle schools for that matter. In the bill, majority of the language in the bill is all about CTE. So the study, for example, policy development policy, page 4, line 16, it's about CTEs. Line 18, it's about CTE. I mean, each bullet is about CTEs until you get to development of the report. Essentially.
Does every supervisory union have a CTE?
There are, no, there's far more supervisory unions than regions for CTEs.
But that's part of the problem. See, if they don't, how do they address the shortage, the shortcoming? And they need to develop a strategic plan, a perspective on if it's lacking, what's lacking, if it's strong. You know, what enhancements could they use? What districts could they partner with to solve shortcomings? We're not trying to solve all of the high school career ambitions here. We're trying to solve this particular shortcoming. That's all I mean.
Mr. Fisher.
Again, Ted Fisher, Agency of Education. I agree with everything that was just said. I love this. And with thanks to you, Mr. Chair, and to Senator Clarkson, this language was proposed by the AOE. And I understand your question about it being limited, but the term comprehensive. To your question a moment ago about where is CTE access, one of the problems we're trying to solve with the CTE bill is the fact that every district, CTE is a flexible pathway for all students in Vermont. It is but we see from the data that most of our CTE centers are hosted or on the same campus as a high school. And we see from the data that the students who go to school next to a CTE or are geographically closer to a CTE are far more likely to go to the CTE center. Some of it's just geographic barrier, but in many of these places, when you're talking about getting into the later years of your education, exploring flexible pathways, CTE is a valid decision-making, and we see the data where, decision to make as part of that, and I absolutely see it here, your point, Senator Gulick, about it's more than just learning. From our perspective, and I understand that this is focused just on CTE when we talk about comprehensive career development, but from our perspective, this is one flexible pathway of many that students could choose, but it's the one that has some of these issues. And that's why we want the comprehensive career development policy in every SU to be focused on how do we make sure that students have full access to this one flexible pathway.
Okay.
That's not going to solve the problem by itself. There are questions of transportation and logistics and bell times and other things. But we do know from data and from conversations that students who don't go, sometimes who don't go to high school in the district that operates the CTE center are sometimes even dissuaded in
Right.
most extreme
Yeah.
cases from going to CTE. And that's one of the problems we'd like to address by part of this. And so if you think that there should be more language about inclusion in flexible pathways, or that kind of how it's included in the broader flexible pathway system,
No,
we'd be happy to work on that with you.
That was helpful.
But
That was helpful, but and
that's the focus.
it looks like this is gonna be a policy that sits at the school board level.
Yes.
Okay.
And that's the intent that will be behind our drafting of the model policy, which is that if we focus entirely on just solving the CTE center's problems, we may be missing part of the conversation.
Okay. I think that helps me get my head around it a little bit more.
Do you want any edits at this point, or do you want to sit with it a little bit?
Can we hear from like some superintendents or principals?
Yeah, we're gonna get from all the Bs.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
on it, but,
'Cause I just. Cause usually when you have a policy at the board level, obviously it should trickle down into the actual day-to-day running of the district to a certain extent, so I'm just wondering what that would be.
So, and just a general question about the curriculum. I mean, is every CTE center gonna be cookie cutter, as far as teaching the same technical?
no, I think they're very
That's what we
different.
need.
Yeah, very.
So is that specified in here?
Well, that's how they've sort of, I think, evolved. For example, Bennington, I don't think we have a little bit of a forest management program, but I think you've got bigger forest management programs, St. John's Fair, depending, I think, on geography, the needs of the town and all
The
that.
local economy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the needs of students, what they're interested in doing. Yeah.
Can I add a little bit to that, just
Yeah.
from experience, but I do feel like tech centers are getting better about regionalizing, and I think, for example, like Burlington and Essex both had a foods program.
Mhm.
But then when we lost our high school, we lost a whole bunch of kids in the food program, and Essex had such a good one that we were like, let's just let them do food. But Burlington has a great aviation program that is so specific to like being near the airport, and that other schools would be able to do that, but it's so.
So that's right.
But yeah, that's
what I'm
really,
thinking.
that's a really good point to be thinking like regionally in terms of.
But are we trying to make this general enough so that we can let each, school board decide what they're gonna teach?
Yeah, we don't want to interfere with that. We just want more people to be thinking about CTE education and general.
Yeah, well, so I'm curious, and since AOE is in the room, I mean, how far back do we want to take a look at this thing? And create, do we want to foster their conversation amongst the SUs and amongst the CTEs about specialization? Like Burlington's got, aviation, and they could attract more than just, their district and surrounding districts, forestry, whatever. Do we want to really foster subject matter expertise, like specializations? My question is, should we give that question to AOE and let them come back with their recommendations based on it? Or is that too broad?
Yeah.
There was a suggestion, do you remember from the AOE suggestions for next year to be thinking about or looking into a one CTE district with the state, which could accomplish that.
Or not, I mean, okay, so my question is, should that be part of this policy development now, or is that policy development for the future? I don't know what AOE is ready to do.
How would you phrase that question in this? If we were saying, put it in the bill, how would you phrase the question that you'd want AOE to look at?
So brought up by my colleague, do we want them all to look alike? The simple answer is no. So what do we want them to look like? What are we trying to enhance? We're trying to enhance regional expertise in industrial or geographic or whatever. So,
I see what you're
I'm not sure how to.
Yeah,
phrase it.
yeah. No, but that's helpful. Yeah. Ted.
I'll just note that this is, sorry again, Ted Fisher. I'll just note that, this has been a long-standing question and conversation and that is, and we, as Senator Gulick just said, we are punted on this year. We are actively involved in the governance. The questions you're trying to solve is the governance issues, and it gets even deeper. So like, we have one aviation program right now, I'm 90% sure. It's really difficult for students from Southern Vermont potentially to come up to that aviation program. So maybe we need more, but where does the boundary go? Right now, to Senator Gulick's example, if your program doesn't operate a program, let's say you don't have a culinary program, you can send to another district. But if you have a culinary program that's full, you can't send the students who didn't make it into that program. So those kind of issues are what we'd like to tackle next year. And maybe it's a CTE district, maybe it's other things. We are actively working on that.
Yeah. I mean, we know from Ms. Emerson,
Right.
there are a lot of kids that want to go to.
Exactly. And so part of that finance conversation is also like, maybe we need to incentivize more access to certain programs, if you remember my comment from last week, but some of that will be coming back. I just checked in the bill because we had at one point asked for a sunset on this because we really are serious about governance. We want to do as much as we can this year and get us working. I don't see a sunset in this version of the bill, but
A sunset for what?
to sunset the finance changes if we don't do governance next year.
Oh, I see.
We had suggested that you sunset the changes before they take effect if the General Assembly next year doesn't act, which is something that you could consider doing. We would recommend.
Senator Sheehan and Senator.
I mean, I was trying to think of language for, getting to the issue of not having cookie cutter CTEs and trying to incorporate language about the needs and available resources that are in an area. I mean, if Brattleboro doesn't have a culinary program, for example, and there's just no one for miles and miles that could teach that, I don't know that it would make sense to, force that requirement. But if it's not available there, I think there should be a way to see, what type of interest exists among the student body and who wants to travel 45 minutes or an hour
Right.
to Bennington if there's a culinary program there. So
But are we forcing it?
force it.
You said.
No, I don't think we are.
Right. I just want to make sure.
Yeah, no, I don't want to.
Yeah,
I don't want to.
Right. So we're looking for more flexibility. We want students to be able to go, like Senator Sheehan said, if they're a group of students. So that's kind of what we're trying to also figure out. I don't know if there's language there that you can, I'm sorry, Senator Williams, my
I
apologies.
think from, I attended a couple meetings with, Stafford and.
Yeah.
There were quite a few CTE centers that are involved in that, but this Emerson. And the primary thing they want from this bill is governance. They don't necessarily want us to tell them what,
Yeah.
but they want to set the guidelines at least. So that there's consistency throughout.
That's a great reminder. I think what we're also all thinking about and grappling with is, can there be at some point some overarching language that talks about, encouraging diverse offerings, making certain that we're not limiting kids who get closed out of programs if they can't go to maybe another program that's 20 miles away, if that's, that sort of thing. So that's maybe something to think about.
I think that's all allowed under law now. There's just not capacity for it. Is that, I think if I'm
Right.
wrong, someone in the room, please
So-
correct me.
Senator Hashim's constituents, if need be, could come to Bennington, permitted, given that as long as the school board says, okay, we can take 5 or 6 students from Senator Hashim's district, bring them over to our district. School board okays it. No problem.
I don't think there's, so
Anything preventing that?
I don't think there's anything legally preventing that, but there may be practical challenges,
Of course.
transportation, weather, the geography of the state and capacity.
Yeah.
But I don't think there's anything that limits in state law, and this is, I'm not an expert on chapter 37, the way that I'm intimately familiar with our tuitioning statutes, right? So I could have missed something. I'm not aware of anything in here that ties attendance at a CTE to,
Your residents.
there are CTE. If the career, I'm reading from section 1541A, the responsibility of local boards and sending districts. If the Career Tech Center for the region does not offer a course of study desired by a student, then the school board has to pay tuition on behalf of that student who applies and is accepted to another CTE center that does offer such a course of study. The district of residence is not responsible for providing for transportation. So that seems pretty explicit. But again,
That seems pretty explicit.
the black letter of the law doesn't always mean that's what's happening
Right.
out there.
Let's continue with the bill and let's yeah, go ahead.
I was going back to the question,
Yeah,
the original question, which
Yeah.
was, it's on page 5, line 11, comprehensive career development policy. You know, is AOE ready to embark on a comprehensive career policy, or we're really focusing on CTEs? Or is the intent to really focus on CTEs?
the intent is to focus. on CTEs.
So
That would be a
language change.
helpful language change. Yes.
The record, Ted Fisher, Vermont Agency of Education. I know that, so CTE as a unit lives within the same division that does the other flexible pathways work. So when we develop this policy, we see no concerns with the language as currently written. I'm sensitive to Senator Gulick's concerns about making sure that the right things are signposted, and yes, it will be focused on CTE because the goal is to ensure that there aren't barriers to participation in CTE, but we have the capacity internally to do this work and to make sure it's aligned with other flexible pathways and is responsive to responsive to those needs and how that would be structured. We're not concerned about our ability to deliver on the policy. And we also have some experience in terms of will be adopted by boards. So we have some experience in developing these kind of board policies. We also have a close working relationship with our good friends, the School Boards Association, who with love and due respect to my colleague in the room here, they will of course share feedback with us in terms of if something isn't workable for the districts. And we have in the past had a public comment on this. We'd be happy to. I actually don't have the language in front of me, so I don't know if we have a public comment requirement in there right now, but we've developed these before. We don't have no concerns about the capacity. If the committee's interested in signposting slightly different things for us, we'd be very open to that.
Can
But
you change the language and then we'll have Jeff Francis and you talk to us about it.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing from you is that you'd like me to change the language, the title of the policy. That will not change the fact that AOE is only directed to develop that policy around CTE, right? So. So section 5, we're on page 5, line 11. Section 5 is the direction to AOE on the timeline with which to develop this model policy. These dates, I'm sure AOE would like to see, the agency would like to see changed. They are
Dates.
the dates,
Yeah.
they're very tight, so
Yeah.
that's a policy decision that, you all can make and is easy for me to change. But subsection A would require AOE to develop the policy by a certain period of time, and then subsection B would require each SU to develop a policy based on the model policy within a certain period of time. And we can make changes to those dates as you see fit. Section 6 on page 6 is some intent language. We're moving on to a different topic on construction aid. So section 6 is basically saying, if you make changes to the state's construction aid program, please don't forget about CTE. It is the intent of the General Assembly to ensure that career and technical education centers and their associated facilities are appropriately and equitably included in future plans to the state's construction aid program.
Can I ask a question about that?
Please.
If and when the school construction aid moratorium is lifted, I'll say when instead of if. Is it really important that career and tech ed be explicitly named in that lifting?
Yes, for the record, Ted Fisher, agency.
Yeah, no need, we got you.
Gotcha, sorry.
No, it's just, I hate to have you always repeat yourself, because.
So we think yes. We don't want to open up two conversations on this. So we think that intent language is probably the way to go. I'll say that, for example, because your colleagues in the House have been looking into the facilities report that the working group came up with, because at our request, working with the Treasurer's Office, we included language about CTEs in those recommendations to try to make sure that both processes are going down the same set of tracks. But we're hoping that we don't, even though CTE, very specifically, the report that y'all contracted for us to implement said do facilities. We don't want to be duplicative or conflicting. So we're hoping it can stay in that area, but just making sure that everyone's attentive and having some intent language, I think, would help with that.
Thank you.
And I can just add, it's chapter 123 in Title 16 that contains the current language around state aid for school construction.
Mhm.
And career and technical education facilities are already included in that.
Okay.
But there is a possibility that the legislature decides to create a new program. And so I think this language is meant to say, in fact, it does explicitly say future updates need to include CTEs, but the current language does include CTE facilities. Okay. We're on page 6, lines 8 and 9. We're in a new topic, and that is career and technical education oversight. So the next couple pages are making essentially the same change regarding who has responsibility for oversight of the career and technical education system. Currently, your statutes contemplate it's the State Board of Education's responsibility. So if you look at page 6, line 14, current law reads the State Board has overall responsibility for the effectiveness of career technical education. This bill proposes to change that to the Secretary of Education. And so the next several pages make the same conforming change, where it was State Board of Education providing an oversight function, and the secretary or the agency is inserted in lieu thereof.
That strikes me as incredibly logical and efficient, but tell me why the agency wants this.
Yeah, so we agree there's a policy reason and there's a history reason. And the policy reason is that for 2 decades, we have not updated the state's rules for career tech ed. We have, of course, Perkins 5 and the federal regulations and funding and program. We haven't updated our state rules. And it's not to knock the state board, but I know that they are very conscious of their capacity and their role, and those conversations are ongoing. When we're doing policy work and making policy recommendations to the legislature, we think carefully about whether we want to move the rules over. And that gets me to the historical reason, which is that when the agency was a department responsive to the state board, the word board was often used in place of where the legislature would use agency now, because the board was the governing entity So the rulemaking that was done in the past was done by the agency, proposed to the board and adopted by the board. And right now, most rulemaking is still done that way. The board gives us their directions for state board rulemaking. We draft things, they go through the public hearing process because they are a volunteer board. And I'm not saying that they're heavily involved in that. As you know, they've been really grappling with rule series changes. But in this instance, particularly because of the governance changes, we think that it's a good policy decision in addition to your updating statute that hasn't been updated since the agency was established and that change was made.
Section 8, we're gonna skip to page 10. I'm mindful of the time here. Page 10, section 8 is transfer of rulemaking authority. So this section would transfer the statutory authority to adopt rules on career and technical education from the State Board of Education to AOE. It would actually deem the rules that are currently in place that the State Board of Education wrote. It would deem them to be rules of the Agency of Education, and then it would require AOE to file notice to the Secretary of State about this change. So this is just, you would see the same language in any area of the law where we're in Vermont, where we're changing rulemaking authority. And then the last substantive section is page 11, section 9. Post-secondary program articulation agreement. So it requires, so remember, post-secondary, we're talking about higher ed here. So it requires a CTE center to all high school CTE centers to have articulation agreements with the Vermont State Colleges Corporation. So that would include Vermont State University and CCV. In the following programs: manufacturing, engineering, health sciences, and education. And then I've added a definition section for articulation agreement that we can change as you see fit. But it's basically, it's an agreement allowing secondary students to earn college credit for the work they're completing in the secondary programs, kind of like a pipeline into the post-secondary programs.
Are we saying to the state university college system that they have to take these credits?
It requires the CTE centers and the state colleges corporation to work that out amongst themselves, but they would have to have course articulation agreements related to the following programs. How many credits that entails them it is not specific here. But yes, it would require articulation agreements between all secondary CTE centers and the Vermont State Colleges Corporation and those specific subject matters.
Ted, do you want to say something about that?
Absolutely. So this is one of the, again, responsive to one of the APA recommendations. We have picked these programs because we think that they're a particularly high need for now. It's worth
Right now.
for right now. It's worth discussing, and I think we have in one of our report back, potentially whether we should expand that or undertake other things to encourage participation in certain groups. I'll just emphasize from our part what Beth just said, which is that that we are not specifically not asking we're not asking you to require anything of the anything specific of the higher education system, more that they would be able to figure out what would be, what does it mean, what would be acceptable. And this is, I think, and I'm not an expert, but this is similar to what we do with early college and dual enrollment, where we have students who receive credit for courses taken at higher education institutions that count for their high school and often count for a college credit. We also have
You're saying that they shall maintain programs and course articulation agreements. So some courses are going to be developed based on this language.
I think it's more of a determination, and I can double check and confirm, but I think, and Secretary Boucher can probably speak to this better on Friday, but I think it's more a question of, okay, so a student has done 2 years of engineering in a CTE center, how does, and then they're going to CCB or they're going to Vermont Tech as part of Vermont State University, how does that get factored into them now being a student at Vermont State University in the tech program, for example? How many credits do they get? What does it count? How do we understand so that you don't have those gaps between, okay, the student took it, but it's not quite up to the standard of what the university wants for a degree program. We iron out kind of the wrinkles and lead to seamless transitions.
But Ms. St. James, does this language allow state colleges to say, no thanks, this does not meet our requirements. We appreciate that you've taken these courses, but we're going to pass for now? Or does it say, we've got to you guys have to set something up to start to accept classes?
It's not specific to what classes,
Right.
but it does, this language as drafted, I would say, does require the Vermont State College Corporation to have program and course articulation agreements with all secondary CTE centers in the following programs. Is that 1 credit for manufacturing, 18 for engineering, 7 for health sciences, and 4 for education? I don't know.
Right,
But I would say, yes, this does require articulation agreements. But the substance of them is not specified here.
Chad, would you please ask the secretary to make sure that on Friday, you have a response from Chancellor Malk as to whether or not this is acceptable?
To consult with the
Whether they agree with this language or not. Yeah, so we can just either move forward or end it. Yeah, Senator Sheen.
Thank you. So I guess just as a note, also in preparation for Friday, I would like to hear more about AOE's capacity to take this on. And I don't mean that in an offensive way at all. I've been at capacity and couldn't take things on either, but I just want to make sure that the agency has the staff available, that they have the time and bandwidth to take this on, because it seems like a big transfer to go from the Board of Education to AOE. And I don't know if I'm overthinking it, but I do just want to cover that topic.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. So you're talking specifically the section that transfers the power from the state force.
Section, that would be 7, and then I think would be the rulemaking on 8.
Right.
Section 8.
So I appreciate the question of concern, because oftentimes when additional work always gets added every year, and sometimes we get additional resources, sometimes we don't. And so I appreciate that. In the governor's recommend, there is a position for the CTE team to support all of this work holistically. We think very carefully about our capacity every time we bring you something. And so we're confident that we can both engage in the rulemaking process as well as support the other requirements of this work. And we don't, we wouldn't be sitting here asking for it if we weren't. We take that really seriously. I mean, you've heard Senator, my comments about legislative reports and our ability to sustain that, because it's a large unfunded mandate every year. And so when we ask for a report back, you know that my eyes have been looking on it because my team has to support that work. And so yes, we feel confident in doing so. I think that and this is just a broader statement, but since you asked, I'll just say it. There's a lot of conversation about AOE's capacity and its ability to do various things and whether folks agree, and we're happy to always have that conversation. I think that some of that is grounded in true reality, and some of it is grounded in concerns about the agency's role or other things. What I'll just say is we're the most staffed I've ever seen us be. We have the lowest vacancy rate in years. We've been adding positions when needed for critical work like this, and we would hope that you and your colleagues in Senate Appropriations would support the governor's request for an additional position on this, because we think it's.
But just to reiterate Senator Sheen's request when the secretary is in for her to confirm all of this that we have.
Oh yeah, she'd be happy to speak to it. She spoke
Senator
to.
Hewlett, Senator Weeks.
I like the program alignment piece a lot, because for years I thought there needs to be more conversation between higher ed and K through 12. I'm wondering why the university wasn't included in this.
Okay.
Ted, I guess that's the question for you.
UVM? Why is
Why-
UVM not?
You mean in the course articulation
Yeah.
agreements? I'm not certain. I can
Okay.
check back.
Senator Weeks.
Yeah, I was just curious, Ted, going back to your comment, is AOE's, acceptance of this effort predicated on something, some staffing, increase? It's in the governor's, budget request, or are you able to accomplish this
You
already?
just mentioned.
Yeah.
Yeah, the 1 point, the new person that they were,
Okay.
you want to repeat that?
Is that-
Oh, yeah,
No,
absolutely.
don't you please.
Okay.
Don't repeat.
I'll just say more directly. This is one of the governor's largest education priorities this year. He views it as must
I get
do.
that, but can you accomplish the comprehensive policy without? Yeah.
We're asking for a position in order to
The answer
support
is
this
no.
work.
Got it.
Did you want to do the date? Did you want to wrap it up with the date?
Sure, section 10, page 11, lines 17 to 18. This bill would take effect on July 1, 2024.
Yeah, please.
One, my final question, as I like to say, is, I think this bill's primarily around sort of governance, supposed to be anyway, around governance, but it does seem to get a little operational here and there, and I'm questioning, like on page 4, when you're talking about providing students with enrichment and exposure.
What line?
1, 2, it's up top.
Thank you, yeah.
And then in 9 and 10, genuine opportunities to participate fully, which by the way, I am completely in favor of. But I'm just wondering if there needs to, like, is there an appropriation attached to that? And what exactly are we asking the schools to do? Because that does seem like added work. So I'll just leave it. And it feels a little operational, but anyway.
And we'll ask you to have
Yeah.
all these questions answered by the secretary.
I'm also happy to speak to that specific one right now, which is that in Act 127 of 2022, we were directed to, the JFO contracted with the APA to come up with a report and study on guidance. We were directed to implement that report. And so that is specific, and the report's deep in my bag somewhere, but that's specific to one of their recommendations. I recognize that it would be probably some cost on schools. And I know that we are concerned about the cost of education. I know that the fees probably would have similar perspective. We think carefully about those things. We still think it's an important thing to do. It would be, again, we have one position request. We would be issuing some guidance related to it, I'm sure, in assisting school districts as we do with everything on technical assistance and things. We still think it's worth doing. And it is specific to one of those recommendations. So to your point about it being, we are punting very specifically on the governance. Everything else we're trying to get done this section that was in the APA's recommendation. So it's directly aligned to one of those.
Thank you.
More of a process question, perhaps for yourself. In a film like this, how come, this is the intent of what the AOE wants to do, all good efforts. Why isn't the finance piece, like, why is there a paragraph of the FTE? That's where the governor's FTE request comes from. It comes from content of this, completely just.
Yeah, it's a great question. We could easily, so I'm not sure the answer, why the draft, they didn't put the FT person in here. I'll let them answer that, but we certainly can. And I think it's a worthwhile thing because we keep asking how, if we'd known that or we're in there, because we haven't gotten the budget yet, it might.
It just seems to be a very pervasive problem.
Yeah.
That we have legislation, and then way over there, in a different conversation, we have to talk about the cost of that legislation.
That's a good point. Would you mind putting the person in to this bill? That would be terrific. And I suspect it would just be taking the language, the same language as the budget, or no?
Unfortunately, no. The
Okay.
budget language usually contains dozens and dozens and dozens of positions. So I'm happy to add that language. It is in addition, there's nothing wrong with that, right? There's
Yeah.
nothing wrong with that. You're gonna want someone, mainly all of us, are gonna have to track this position and the budget language.
Sure.
So that there's not.
I get that. It's just, we're seeing it in other committees as well. That we talk about efforts, all good efforts, and then we talk about costs. It's like an afterthought.
all policy decisions for you all to manage?
It's an interesting question. I wonder if we've evolved that way in part because people are afraid there might be mistakes where we double.
It is extra work for all of us, you all and staff.
Yeah.
To try and watch multiple bills that are trying to achieve the same thing.
But-
And then at the last minute, decide which one's gonna go
Right.
forward, right?
Yeah,
That's not to say that you can't, that's not to dissuade you in any way of putting positions in your policy bills.
but that's helpful. Yeah. I like the idea of putting this position in here. I think it would really help for our colleagues and others to explain, that, hey, this moves forward. It's just not for you to talk about CTEs, this position, how the work is gonna be done. So that would be great.
So that would usually comes with an appropriation. Do you want me to just create the position with no appropriation, or do you want me to add the appropriation?
Would the governor's budget have the appropriation in it or no?
I don't,
Ted seems to think it might, but at least the question is for you, so.
it may, usually the way that the budget comes out is that for position, I'll look into it. But it would be something for you all to think about as far as where this bill goes, right? You have the appropriation.
Yeah, well, we know that I think all of our bills so far are going to appropriations. But so,
Interesting, you don't have a lot of money in your bills.
well, literacy is going there, CTE, right, prior to this, it might not have gone there. But I believe Senator Sheep's bill would go there on, I think the refugee bill, because unless Scott Giles comes in and says we can deal with it within our budget. When I was counting, it looked like bunch of things were going, but I could be completely off.
I will add the position
Beautiful.
and I will add the appropriation.
And what Jane usually does is yanks the appropriation out and still the bill goes forward, and then hopefully we see it in the end. But I think it's good to put it in. Great. Do you mind sticking around for a few minutes while Mr. Smith testifies?
Oh, sure.
And then we're gonna shift to libraries. Please, come on up. Introduce yourself and tell us your thoughts on S304, and then we are gonna shift to libraries. Yep.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, hi, my name is Bill Smith. I'm an attorney in Northfield, and I also have a lobbying practice that includes representing the Vermont Retail Lumber Dealers Association. That group has an interest in this 304 that I've discussed with your chair. It seems like numerous times already, so
And Bill, we're gonna go around and introduce ourselves, so we know, who's around the table, since you're pretty new to this commission.
Attorney Williams, Rob.
Still Senator Dave Weeks from Brooklyn.
Richard Sears, Bennington County.
The young Richard.
Our team will be looked at for all and
Not already Shane Limit down.
Thanks, Bill.
Well, so my job is sort of to tee this up for more, more detailed discussions with two of my board members, Tim Combs,
Yeah.
Madison County, and Ed Drew from Wyndham County. WW Building and Goodrow Lumber respective, reverse. So my members have about 45 locations around the state. They provide the building materials for most every general contractor out there has an account with one of my members. So if you want to build homes, my members will sell you everything you need to do it, which is great. They also take part in the building trade CTE programs, both on the boards of some of the tech centers. They certainly interact a lot with the students themselves, and know that either the students might come to work for them someday, or they might be a customer. So they've decided that they've seen how it plays out. They understand the demographics in Vermont, and we need more young people coming through the building trades. And S304, our board members met with the some agency of education staff and the governor's staff online right before session. We're given a heads up about this and that we support it. The short answer is we do. And so not to spend time getting in the way of you doing something we agree with. I can give you this in about 5 minutes if you'd like. Looking at the reports,
the APA report, as you call it, looking at, the Age of Education's, documents they gave me on February 13th about leadership support and oversight. And looking at, Scott Farr's testimony for the CTE instructors, prioritizing those recommendations. In large part, members agree with that and support that, and will do whatever they can to make sure S304 gets passed this year. We would say that, there's a very slight difference between H716 and H304. The only one that jumps out to us that we would prefer on H716 is, section 10 of that bill has a specific deadline for doing the, statewide calendar. So we'll be looking at that by September 1, 24 for the 25-26 school year.
This is in the House version of the.
Right, that's in the House version of non.
Mhm, okay.
So, we understand that we'd like to flag that as an issue for you. That's something that
Yeah.
these are, building trades, there's deadlines.
Yeah.
And you gotta organize and get your stuff done and do it when the customer wants it. And so we like deadlines. That's why we like section 10 of 716.
So it's section 10. Okay, we
Yeah.
can take a look at that
Um,
separately.
One of the things, I think it might have been addressed in, either Scott Farr's testimony and his understanding of where does the academic department or the embedded academics come in this bill. I think it might be possible to do it by rule. I'd like to make sure that that's either a clear assumption or if not, it might be something that, because embedded academics is key. You've heard this before, I know, Mr. Chairman, particularly where, your English, your math could be embedded in your building trades class because, you're measuring things, you're reading blueprints, you're figuring out, how to ask for the right, equipment and materials to get a job done. If you have to come back to school and go back to take another math class or take
Right.
another English class, it can slow up graduation, or it could make it so you have to work a lot harder to graduate than your peers are doing, for doing work that you're already really doing. It seems inconsistent to me around the state, when I looked at it, that some CTEs do that, some sending districts do that, and some don't. So if there's a way to unify that perspective on that, we would definitely ask for that. So, another thing in your bill here, just in the interest of time today, section 9, where you, talking about the post-secondary program alignment, I just would point out that the old, Vermont Tech Center, now the Randolph campus, Vermont State Colleges, has a very active, engagement with the building trades programs. And so if there's a way to get college credit at BSU, excuse me, for work they're doing in high school.
Yep.
Like our other programs, I would just say, consider maybe adding number 5 in their building trades. To give that some thought, that's all how that affects what Age Education wants to do, if that's formed or not, but it's certainly something to think about, because this program is key to, having folks out there, they can build these new homes that we've been talking about and the government's been talking about this year.
Mr. Sorry, would you bring that back then, Ted, to the secretary for her to comment on Friday? Number 5 being building trades. Thanks.
In section 9. So
Section 9.
I guess that kind of gets me to, for teeing it up here for Tim and Ed next week with you folks. I understand, I think you're coming in on 28th. So I'm looking over at Morgan to say 28th in the afternoon. I think that's the general idea. And that will also lead into a reminder to you folks, and you'll be hearing from us later on, that on Tuesday, March 26th is when we're doing the building trades. Every tech center in the state that has building trades is coming to the Randolph campus at Vermont State University. And the chair's been there in the past.
Great.
The events, we're changing around this year. We'd rather have you come and meet with your district's building trade students and instructors. They'll be there. And they're doing have lunch with them and talk to the students directly and find out what they need. I think that's the best way for us all to understand what maybe our students need for career development, what they see as being important to them going forward, so that we're not all in this beautiful bubble in the Golden Dome here, and we're out listening to what our future general contractors might want. And we're certainly listening to them. That's why we have this program that we do every year in March down at the Randolph campus. So community trip. We'll be inviting you down for that. You'll hear from us after
The 28th of March, is that
26th, Tuesday, the 26th of March. I remember coming in February 28th. That's she is right. Okay. She was in the room, yeah. So I kind of just chucked a lot you right there. I hope I try to get you back on.
That's really helpful. No,
Right.
that's helpful.
Yeah. And what would, I guess, maybe you're thinking about, or if you have for me, I can deliver to them, what would you want to hear from someone that's on the board of the CT or a building supply company owner, because one or two of them will be here next Wednesday. And thank you.
Yeah, Senator Sheen,
Maybe apprenticeships, you know, with these contractors, I think that would be, because I know, you know, sometimes you have to get creative and, you know, sometimes there isn't, you know, the brick and mortar building to send a student,
Right.
you know, are there apprenticeship possibilities for, you know, a high school student who wants to learn carpentry, but, you know, that doesn't have that program
Right.
available in a nearby area. But
Right.
One thought.
Okay. Okay, I'll make sure that I speak to that. Thank you all very much.
So just one quick question, actually, it's maybe more for Ted's attention, this question. The House bill, the related House CTE bill, which has common schedules, common bells, call it common bells. I was just wondering if maybe we had a comment on that at this stage. It's a fairly significant shift.
Yeah, and why it wasn't recommended for this bill, I suspect you drafted theirs as well.
Yeah, again, sorry, and again, for the record, Ted Fisher, Vermont Agency of Education. So the agency requested a sort of, so there's a lot of interest, just back up one step. There's a lot of policy interest in a uniform school calendar requirement, which this is a longstanding issue. When former Secretary French was a superintendent, it was an issue and he was part of a legislatively mandated blue ribbon commission. We've been unable to agree. Right now, we have common calendars by CTE regions, but they don't match up fully. Sometimes there's an in-service day that isn't shared. There's also a problem of what we call common bell times, so periods don't end at the same point, if you remember my comments last week. So we wanted to try to align the bell times and make sure
I
that
get the concept, I'm just wondering what the AOE feels.
so that's what we proposed. The House has taken to this.
That's all we need to know. Great.
Okay.
Correct. Anything else?
No, sir. See you next Wednesday.
Great. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Anderson. Welcome.
Thank you.
I think this is gonna be relatively.
Yes, exceptionally brief.
Bummer. So this is, the library bill, just given that I believe we have Eric Fitzpatrick coming in tomorrow to talk about firearm laws and the role of whether or not we are jumping into areas that might have constitutional implications. I'd love to see a new copy and a brief highlighted overview of 220, which I believe is probably in our folders.
You should have a copy of draft 1.1 of the committee's amendment. This is a starting point for progressing through your discussions.
Right.
High level overview, leaving committee last week. You had given me direction to remove the electronic literary product sections from the bill. And then you had a number of other sections that were subject to further discussion and review, which remained in here for purposes of your discussion moving forward with Eric and others.
Great.
There are only two substantive changes within this draft. They all later in the bill. I first, in section 11 on page 8, have highlighted the provision related to the appropriations for libraries by municipalities. So one of the things that you had focused in on in some detail was the clause that read insufficient amounts. That is in space, sufficient amounts. And there was some committee discussion about replacing that with a more appropriate term. For the time being, I've highlighted it and left it as the underlying language that does not have that clause.
Thank you.
So that you can have that discussion moving forward. Towards the end of the amendment on page 10, a little bit of explanation here. you had given me some instruction to work with the state librarian to discuss whether the rules governing minimum standards for public libraries were something that the department wanted and would pursue. And the feedback that I received is that rulemaking authority was not necessary or desired.
Okay.
So that section is taken out, and in its place is authority for the department to, discretionary basis, develop best practices and guidelines for public libraries and library service levels. Because the rulemaking authority and the electronic literary product sections are removed from the draft, those were the two pieces that had some required connection within explanation of the General Assembly's intent. The rulemaking, because LCAR requires an expression of intent every time you are giving an administrative agency rulemaking authority, and the electronic literary product because it's been subject to the federal and constitutional challenges under US copyright. With all those sections out, the expression of intent is not as necessary, so.
Mr. Sherman, do you want to say anything? We've removed that section, but I know you've been involved with talking with folks about copyright law. Can I just say a couple of words from there?
Sure, thank you, Mr. Chair. Nick Sherman, Leonine Public Affairs, representing the Association of American Publishers. AAP's concern was with section 2, so we appreciate the committee removing it. And as you said, it related, there's a legal concern and a fundamental concern. The legal one was it infringed on US copyright law. Fundamental concern really being the ability of authors and other content creators having the ability to earn a living under the protection of the copyright law. So AAP appreciates the committee's willingness to remove the section and will be submitting some written testimony just for your record, so you have it, that goes into a lot more detail about the concern.
Great. Yes.
I did send you some language just now, because I accidentally sent it to Beth, just out of habit.
okay.
But it's around school, library, collection development policies, as well as reconsideration. Which I think they wanted specific language.
Great.
So in this committee and in our other morning committee, there's been some comments about, like, giving an example, page 10, line 1 and 2. This is a diversity clause. No, Brent, I'm not there.
10, line 1 and 2.
So, you know, we keep focusing on race, et cetera, but the word religion's dropped out of all these, kind of trying to be kind of inclusive comments. And I'm wondering if the intent was that it's somehow embedded in ethnicity or not. I mean,
Interesting question.
it's consistent dropout now. And I'll be forthright. I'm not the most religious guy, but my constituents are noting it as it's a kind of routine now. And I'm wondering if that's anybody.
This is written as an exhaustive list, so if it's something that you want to see called out as a policy matter, it should be added to the exhaustive list.
I don't quite follow.
So there's two different types of lists that appear in statute. You have exhaustive and non-exhaustive.
Okay.
Non-exhaustive usually starts with the term including, right? So you would have some sort of general requirement, and that might be, policies that reflect Vermont's diverse people and history, including race, ethnicity, sex, gender identity, sexual orientation. That means that it's, a much larger list, and these are examples. The way that this is written is that this is exhaustive. The requirement is for these specific diversity classifications.
So this is specific.
Yes. So if you wanted to call out, in the way that this is structured, if you wanted to call out religion as a basis for the policy diversity, you should call it out.
Catherine, do you want to explain this?
I think that I can shed a little bit of light on it and also make a recommendation. I believe this language may mirror the language in the state curator's collection development policy. The working group actually had more expansive language that included, I believe, religion and also political point of view. One of the members of the Board of Libraries also noted that I believe the word ethnicity is present, but maybe not race, or vice versa. It's one or the other. So there may be a better way to address it than the exhaustive list. You might you might consider looking at either adding to the list, which sounds like a good possibility. And certainly including religion is very important. And it's a freedom to exercise religion is so instrumental in our country, but also our libraries support that with learning and reading. And that's one of the things we want everyone, including youth, to have access to. But I would suggest that you might look at public accommodation law, which may have a longer list and might be of use, but certainly the department is open to a very inclusive list here. We want people's political persuasions. We want materials for people on all sides of the political spectrum and all religious backgrounds to be found in the libraries.
So by all political views, progressives and Democrats.
So,
I did that with my brush over here.
so if you just mentioned, the public accommodation, that everything would be included. Is that what you're saying?
Possibly, but I would defer to counsel on that because I'm not sure that religion is called out expressly in public accommodation law, nor is probably political preference called out expressly in public accommodation law.
When we're talking about public accommodations, we're primarily talking about accessibility. So we would, maybe what you would want to look at is what Supreme Court jurisprudence is called suspect classifications. But again, you could turn this into a non-exhaustive list, provide the examples that you want to call out expressly for the department to look at, including religion, political beliefs.
Socioeconomic status.
Do you mind working with Senator Williams Weeks and just putting, or Williams, and just put together something that the committee can look at, just to add? I mean, I have no issues with it at all. It seems like it's a logical thing. It's certainly, that'd be great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Okay, let's take 5 minutes and move it back and shift to